In our previous chapter, we traced the incredible rise of Ernesto Guevara from a young Argentine doctor to a central figure of the Cuban Revolution. Side by side with Fidel Castro, he fought through the rugged mountains to overthrow the oppressive dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista. With the victory won, Guevara assumed the position of immense power, serving as a key leader within the newly formed Cuban government. He worked tirelessly in offices and factories, but the quiet life of an administrator was never his ultimate destination or final goal, that the fire of revolution had to spread far beyond the shores of Cuba to liberate the oppressed across the globe. Driven by this conviction, Guevara made a fateful decision to leave his titles behind, departing secretly into the shadows to continue the struggle. His next destination was not announced to the world, it was hidden deep in Central Africa. In 1965, Ernesto Guevara traveled secretly to the Congo, where a rebellion had formed after the assassination of independence leader Patrice Lumumba. The region was unstable, fractured by competing factions. To Guevara, it looked like the front line of a wider anti-colonial struggle. If revolution could take hold there, he believed it might spread. Reality proved far more complicated. Communication between rebel groups was weak, training was inconsistent. Discipline so central to Guevara's strategy in Cuba was difficult to maintain. He found himself confronting problems that ideology alone could not solve. Cultural differences, logistical failures, and limited local support undermined the effort. Even basic coordination became uncertain. The conditions that had allowed guerrilla warfare to grow in Cuba were largely absent. Months passed with little progress, illness spread, morale declined. Guevara later described the mission as a painful lesson, one that revealed how fragile revolutionary theory could become. By late 1965, the campaign was quietly abandoned. He left Africa in secrecy, the operation largely unknown to the outside world. For the first time since joining Castro's movement, he had faced unmistakable failure. Yet failure did not end his commitment. If anything, it sharpened it. After a brief, hidden return to Cuba, Guevara began planning once more. He searched for another place where revolution, against the odds, might still be possible. He chose Bolivia, and this final decision would define how history remembered him. Bolivia was meant to be a beginning, instead, it would become an ending. In 1966, Ernesto Guevara entered the country in secret, using a false identity and altered appearance. The plan was ambitious: build a rural guerrilla movement that could ignite revolution across South America. From a small nucleus of fighters, he believed momentum could spread beyond borders, repeating what had happened in Cuba. But from the start, the conditions were different. Local support was limited. Communication with allies outside the country was unreliable. The Bolivian Communist Party, expected to assist, fractured over strategy. Isolation grew slowly. Then all at once, supplies ran short. Illness returned. Government forces, trained and advised with foreign assistance, tightened their search through the rugged terrain. Guevara kept a detailed diary during the campaign. Its entries reveal exhaustion, frustration, and persistent stays marked by hunger, difficult marches, and constant danger. Yet they also show that he refused to abandon the mission, even as the possibility of success narrowed. By October 1967, the guerrilla group was surrounded in the remote Quebrada del Uro. A brief firefight ended with Guevara wounded and captured by Bolivian soldiers. For the first time since the revolution began nearly a decade earlier, he was no longer moving forward. No mountains to retreat into, no reinforcements coming. Only uncertainty inside a small village schoolhouse where the next decision would not be his to make. And within hours, the struggle that defined his life would reach its final moment, one that would echo far beyond Bolivia's borders. On October 9, 1967, the decision was carried out quietly. No battlefield, no final speech to the world. Ernesto Guevara, held in the Bolivian village of La Higuera after his capture the previous day, executed by a Bolivian soldier following orders from the country's military leadership. He was 39 years old. The operation unfolded under intense secrecy, shaped by both domestic authority and the wider tensions of the Cold War. News of his death spread rapidly across continents. But confusion came first. Officials initially claimed he had died from wounds received in combat. Soon, photographs of his body were released to the press intended to prove the revolutionary leader was truly gone. Instead, the images traveled the world and fixed his face permanently in global memory. What was meant to end a story began transforming it. Supporters mourned him as a martyr who had sacrificed everything for political ideals. Critics pointed to the violence of guerrilla warfare and the consequences of revolutionary rule in Cuba. Even in death, agreement proved impossible. His remains were buried in an unmarked grave near Valle Grande, their location unknown to the public for decades. The secrecy suggested fear not of the man himself, but of what his memory might inspire, because something unusual was already happening. A defeated guerrilla in a remote Bolivian village was becoming a worldwide symbol, appearing on posters, banners, and protest movements. His image, captured years earlier by Alberto Corda, began a second life. The man was gone, but the symbol was only beginning, and symbols often travel further than the people who create them. In the years after his death, Ernesto Guevara's presence did not fade. It expanded across borders, languages, and generations that had never seen him alive. Student movements in Europe carried his portrait through crowded streets. Protesters in Latin America invoked his name as a promise that resistance was still possible. For many, he represented defiance against inequality and foreign domination. For others, he symbolized the dangers of armed revolution and one-party rule. The same image inspired hope and warning. Few historical figures divide opinion so completely. Fewer still remain culturally visible decades after their death. In 1997, 30 years after his execution, a team of specialists located remains believed to be Guevara's near Valle Grande, Bolivia. Forensic analysis supported the identification. His remains were returned to Cuba and reburied in the city of Santa Clara. Santa Clara, the site of his most decisive military victory during the revolution. Thousands attended the ceremony, transforming a long-hidden grave into a national monument. Yet the deeper transformation had already occurred. His photograph head tilted slightly upward, eyes fixed beyond the frame, became one of the most reproduced images in modern history. Printed on posters, clothing, murals, and political banners, it moved far beyond the specific ideas he once argued. In some places, the image stood for revolution. In others, for youth rebellion or simply style detached from history. A complex life was becoming a simplified symbol, admired, criticized, commercialized, and this raised a difficult question that history still has not settled. The controversial official, the global icon, or the man hidden somewhere beneath all of them? To answer that, we have to return not to how he died, but to what he believed. At the center of Ernesto Guevara's life was not power, but belief. He argued that revolutions were not only political events, they were moral transformations. A new society, in his view, required a new kind of human being, one motivated less by personal reward and more by collective responsibility. He called this idea the creation of the new man, shaped through shared struggle, education, and sacrifice. To supporters, this vision offered dignity in a world marked by inequality. To critics, it sounded like an attempt to reshape individuals through ideology and state control. The same words carried hope and unease. As Minister of Industries in Cuba, Guevara pushed for rapid industrialization and voluntary labor campaigns, encouraging citizens to work beyond material incentives. He believed economic systems driven purely by profit would reproduce injustice, but results were mixed. Production targets were often missed, shortages persisted. The distance between revolutionary ideals and everyday reality became harder to ignore. He accepted austerity personally, living with relative simplicity compared to many officials. Yet the broader experiment faced pressures. No single leader could resolve international isolation, dependence on Soviet trade, and the limits of centralized planning inside a small island economy. What makes Guevara difficult to categorize is this tension between intention and outcome. He pursued equality with uncompromising intensity, but the methods he endorsed, including armed struggle and strict political control, remain deeply contested. History rarely offers clean judgments. Instead, it leaves contradictions that refuse to disappear. And perhaps the most revealing question is not whether he was hero or villain, but why his story still feels urgent long after the Cold War that shaped it has ended. Because the forces he confronted, power, inequality, revolution, sacrifice, have not disappeared. They have only changed form. To understand why Ernesto Guevara still matters, you have to look beyond the legend and into the human cost of the era that shaped him. The mid-20th century was defined by confrontation, empires collapsing, new nations struggling to define themselves, superpowers competing for influence across continents. In that environment, choices felt absolute, neutral ground was rare. Leaders and movements were pulled into alliances that promised survival but demanded loyalty. Cuba's alignment with the Soviet Union placed the island at the center of global tension, most dramatically during the 1962 missile crisis, when the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before. Guevara supported confrontation with the United States more aggressively than some of his allies. Documents and testimonies from the period show he believed the global balance of power required bold resistance, even under extreme risk. Others inside the Cuban leadership favored caution, aware that survival of the revolution depended on avoiding total destruction. These disagreements revealed a deeper divide about strategy and about how far conviction should go. Yet beyond geopolitics, ordinary lives were unfolding. Families adapting to shortages, young people mobilized by ideology, exiles leaving the country with uncertain futures. By the time his life ended in a small Bolivian village, Ernesto Guevara had already become more than a man. To some, he was a symbol of resistance against injustice. To others, a warning about the dangers of revolutionary power. The truth lies somewhere in the tension between those views. Guevara's story does not end with his death. It turns a defeated revolutionary into an immortal symbol,